The rain was a cold, insistent whisper against my threadbare jacket, each drop a tiny pinprick of misery. I'd been walking for what felt like an eternity, the gravel road stretching ahead like a gray ribbon unspooling into an indifferent horizon. My thumb, perpetually extended, felt numb, a useless appendage. This stretch of road, miles from anywhere, was notoriously empty. A hitchhiker's purgatory, I'd often thought, half joking, half resigned. The old pickup had died an ignominious death back at the trailer, a wheezing cough and then silence, leaving me stranded and the prospect of groceries a distant dream. I just needed to get to town. Just to town. Then a low rumble, a sound so unexpected it made me flinch. I turned, squinting through the sheeting rain, and saw it, a dark, imposing vehicle, not the beat-up sedan or clunky truck I'd hoped for, but a sheriff's cruiser. My stomach clenched. Trouble, I thought, even though I hadn't done anything. Not really. The truck pulled alongside me, its tires spitting water, and the window rolled down with a soft whir. "You need a ride, kid?" The voice was low, gravelly, and undeniably female. I peered inside, my heart doing a strange little jig against my ribs. The woman behind the wheel was all sharp angles and quiet authority. Her uniform, dark and crisp, seemed to absorb the dim light of the afternoon. Her hair, the color of rich earth, was pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense bun, and her eyes, even in the gloom, held a startling intensity, a deep, unsettling blue. She looked older than me, certainly, with a network of fine lines fanning out from the corners of her eyes, but not old. Strong. That was the word that came to mind. Unflinchingly strong. "Yes, ma'am," I managed, my voice a reedy thing against the drumming rain. "Just trying to get to town." She studied me for a long moment, her gaze sweeping over my soaked clothes, my too-thin frame, the desperate hope that must have been etched across my face. I felt an uncomfortable heat rise in my cheeks under her scrutiny. It wasn't accusatory, not exactly, but it was thorough, like she was cataloging every detail, every potential story I might be carrying. "Get in," she said, her voice betraying nothing. It was an order, not an invitation. I didn't hesitate. The passenger door opened with a solid thunk, and I practically fell inside, shaking water from my hair like a wet dog. The interior of the cruiser was surprisingly warm, smelling faintly of leather, stale coffee, and something metallic, like a gun holster. I pulled the door shut, the sound echoing in the sudden quiet, and exhaled slowly, a long, shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Thank you," I said again, trying to sound more composed, more grateful. "I really appreciate it, Sheriff." She nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible movement, and put the truck in gear. The cruiser moved forward, smooth and powerful, eating up the miles. I sat stiffly, hands clasped in my lap, acutely aware of her presence beside me. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. I kept my gaze fixed on the road ahead, watching the wipers sweep arcs through the blurry gray world outside. I could feel her eyes on me sometimes, brief, assessing glances, but I didn't dare meet them. I was a stray, a nobody, and she was the law. The power imbalance hummed between us, a tangible thing. "What's your name, kid?" she asked, breaking the quiet with a jolt. "Jamie," I replied, a little too quickly. "Jamie Reed." "Sheriff Miller," she supplied, not offering a first name, just the formal title. "Where are you headed in town?" "The grocery store." Mostly, I admitted, feeling a fresh wave of embarrassment wash over me. "My truck broke down. Back at the trailer." She grunted, a non-committal sound that could mean anything. I braced myself for a lecture about hitchhiking, about the dangers, about my choices. But it didn't come. Instead, she just drove, the steady hum of the engine a counterpoint to the relentless rain. I risked a quick glance at her profile. Her jaw was set, her gaze focused on the road, her hands, strong and capable, resting lightly on the steering wheel. There was a quiet intensity about her, a contained energy that was both intimidating and, in a strange way, compelling. I found myself wondering about her, about the life she led, the things she must have seen. The town, when we finally reached it, was a blur of neon signs and wet asphalt. The cruiser pulled up in front of the small, nondescript grocery store, its engine rumbling to a stop. I reached for the door handle, eager to escape the suffocating intimacy of the small space. "Thanks again, Sheriff," I said, my hand on the latch. "I really appreciate it." "Jamie," she said, and I paused, my hand still on the handle, my eyes meeting hers for the first time since I'd gotten in. Her blue eyes, deep and unreadable, held mine. "Be careful out there." It wasn't a warning, not exactly. More like a quiet observation, a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher in their depths. Concern, maybe? Or just the weary wisdom of someone who had seen too much. I swallowed, a lump forming in my throat. "I will," I promised, and then, before I could overthink it, I pushed the door open and stepped out into the cold, wet air. The cruiser pulled away almost immediately, leaving me standing on the sidewalk, the scent of her, of leather and coffee and something metallic, lingering in my nostrils. The rain had eased to a drizzle, but the chill had sunk deep into my bones. I watched the tail lights disappear down the street, a strange mixture of relief and something else, something akin to disappointment, swirling inside me. The grocery store was warm, smelling of disinfectant and ripe fruit, a welcome change from the damp chill outside. I pushed a cart through the aisles, picking out the necessities: bread, milk, instant coffee, a cheap can of soup. My mind, however, kept replaying the scene in the cruiser. Sheriff Miller. Her steady gaze, the quiet authority in her voice, the unexpected ride. It was such a small thing, really, a simple act of assistance, but it had felt momentous, a crack in the usual indifference of my world. I usually tried to stay invisible, to blend in, but she had seen me. Really seen me. I paid for my meager groceries, the familiar sting of my dwindling funds a dull ache in my chest. Outside, the drizzle had stopped, leaving the air fresh and clean, but the sky remained a bruised gray. I slung my backpack, now heavier with provisions, over my shoulder and started the long walk back to the trailer. The thought of another several miles on foot was daunting, but at least I wouldn't be doing it in the rain. As I walked, I couldn't shake the image of her eyes, that unsettling blue. There was a loneliness in them, I thought, a quiet melancholy that resonated with something deep inside me. It was a fleeting impression, perhaps just a projection of my own feelings onto a stranger, but it lingered. I was used to people looking through me, or past me, rarely at me. But she had. And the way she'd said my name, Jamie, not kid, not hitchhiker, but my name, had sent a strange shiver down my spine. It felt like an acknowledgement, a subtle recognition of my existence. The walk back was uneventful, the road blessedly dry. By the time I reached the turnoff for the trailer park, my legs ached and my shoulders were protesting the weight of the backpack. The trailer, a rusting metal box nestled among similar boxes, looked even more dilapidated in the fading light. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a small haven of quiet solitude. I unlocked the door, the familiar squeak of the hinges a welcome sound, and stepped inside, dropping my backpack with a thud. The silence of the trailer wrapped around me, a comforting blanket. I put away the groceries, made myself a cup of instant coffee, and sat at the small, wobbly table, staring out the grimy window. The sky was turning a bruised purple, the first stars beginning to prick through the gloom. I thought about the broken-down truck, about the repairs I couldn't afford, about the endless cycle of making do. It was a bleak landscape, both inside and out. But then, an image of Sheriff Miller, her strong hands on the steering wheel, her intense blue eyes, flickered in my mind. It was a small, unexpected warmth in the cold expanse of my day. The next morning, the sun was a watery disk in a pale sky, but at least the rain had gone. I spent the day tinkering with the truck, a futile exercise, really. The engine was beyond my limited mechanical skills and even more limited budget. I needed a new part, a specific, expensive part, and that meant more money than I currently possessed. The frustration gnawed at me, a familiar companion. As evening approached, I decided a walk might clear my head. I headed down the road, away from the trailer park, towards the small creek that snaked through the woods. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. I found a smooth, flat rock by the water's edge and sat, skipping stones across the dark surface. The rhythm was meditative, a small distraction from the anxieties that constantly circled my mind. I was halfway through a particularly satisfying skip when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. My head snapped up. It was the same dark cruiser, pulling slowly to a stop a few yards from where I sat. My heart gave a familiar lurch. Sheriff Miller. Again. She got out of the truck, moving with an unhurried grace that belied her imposing presence. She was in uniform, as always, her hat shadowing her eyes slightly. She walked towards me, her boots making soft thuds on the damp ground. I stood up, feeling a sudden nervousness, like a child caught doing something wrong. "Jamie," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying clearly in the evening air. "Everything all right?" "Yes, ma'am," I replied, my voice a little too high. "Just getting some air." She nodded, her gaze sweeping over the creek, the woods, then settling on me. "I saw your truck still sitting there. Didn't make it to the shop." I shook my head. "Needs a new fuel pump." "Don't have the money for it right now." The admission felt raw, a vulnerability I usually kept hidden. She was silent for a moment, her eyes unreadable. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "I know a mechanic in town. Good man. Tell him Sheriff Miller sent you. He might be able to help you out with the part, maybe let you pay it off." My jaw dropped slightly. "Really? You'd do that?" "Just trying to help a kid out," she said, her voice flat, but I thought I detected a hint of something softer in her eyes. "No one should be stranded out here." She held out the paper. My fingers brushed hers as I took it. Her skin was warm, calloused. A strange current, faint but undeniable, passed between us. It was a fleeting touch, barely there, but it left a lingering warmth on my fingertips. "Thank you, Sheriff," I said, my voice thick with genuine gratitude. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," she replied, a faint, almost smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Just get that truck running." She turned to leave, but then paused, her back to me. "You still eating those instant noodles, Jamie?" I flushed. "Sometimes." She sighed, a soft, exasperated sound. "Come by the station tomorrow, around noon. I'll make sure you get a proper meal." My head reeled. A proper meal? From the sheriff? It was so unexpected, so completely out of the realm of anything I could have anticipated. But why? I blurted out before I could stop myself. She turned, her blue eyes meeting mine, and this time there was no mistaking the flicker of something akin to concern, even tenderness. "Because everyone deserves a hot meal, Jamie. And you look like you could use one." Her gaze lingered on me for a moment longer, then she gave a curt nod and walked back to her cruiser. I watched her drive away, the paper with the mechanic's name clutched in my hand. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples. I was left standing by the creek, the chill of the evening air slowly seeping into my bones, but a different kind of warmth, a surprising and unfamiliar warmth, blooming in my chest. Sheriff Miller. She was an enigma, a puzzle I hadn't even known I was trying to solve. And now I was going to have lunch with her. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The next day, I walked into the sheriff's station feeling like an alien in a foreign land. The fluorescent lights hummed, the air smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant, and the few deputies I saw gave me curious, wary glances. I found Sheriff Miller in her office, a surprisingly small, Spartan room with a cluttered desk and a window looking out onto the main street. She was bent over some paperwork, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Sheriff Miller?" I said, my voice a little shaky. She looked up, her blue eyes softening slightly as they registered my presence. "Jamie, come in." She gestured to the worn visitor's chair opposite her desk. "I just need to finish this report, then we can eat." I sat, stiff and awkward, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. The silence was less oppressive than in the cruiser, but still thick with unspoken things. I watched her, fascinated. The way she chewed on the end of her pen, the small, almost imperceptible frown lines that appeared between her brows as she read. She was so focused, so completely immersed in her work. It struck me then that she was probably a very lonely person too. The job, the authority, the isolation of being the law in a small town. It must be heavy. After what felt like an eternity, she put down her pen, stretched, and exhaled. All right. Lunch, she stood, and I quickly followed suit. She led me to a small break room, surprisingly cozy, with a microwave, a coffee maker, and a small table. On the table, 2 plates were already set out. There was a steaming bowl of something that smelled incredible, rich, savory, and undeniably homemade. It's stew, she said, catching my awestruck gaze. My grandmother's recipe. Hope you like it. I sat down, almost reverently, as she ladled generous portions onto our plates. The stew was thick with chunks of beef, potatoes, carrots, and herbs. It was the most delicious thing I had tasted in a long, long time. I ate slowly, savoring every mouthful, the warmth spreading through me, chasing away the lingering chill of the past few weeks. This is amazing, Sheriff, I managed, my mouth full. She smiled, a small, genuine smile that transformed her face, softening the sharp angles, bringing a warmth to her eyes I hadn't seen before. Just Miller, Jamie. When we're not on duty. Miller, I repeated, tasting the name on my tongue. It felt strange, intimate. Like a secret. We ate in comfortable silence for a while, the clinking of spoons against ceramic the only sound. I felt a sense of ease settle over me, an unfamiliar peace. It was just stew, just a meal, but it felt like so much more. It felt like care. Like being seen, not as a problem to be solved, but as a person. So, Miller said, breaking the quiet, her voice a little softer now, less formal. Tell me about your truck. What exactly is wrong with it? And I did. I told her about the sputtering engine, the dying cough, the despair I felt looking at it, knowing I couldn't fix it. I found myself talking more freely than I had with anyone in years about my struggles, my hopes, the quiet desperation that defined my life. She listened, really listened, her gaze steady, her expression thoughtful. There was no judgment in her eyes, only a quiet understanding. When I finished, the silence that followed was different. It wasn't awkward or charged, but companionable, a shared space. It sounds like you're pretty resourceful, Jamie, Miller said finally, her voice gentle. You've been making do with a lot. I shrugged, a small, self-deprecating gesture. It's all I know. It doesn't have to be, she said, her blue eyes holding mine. There was a challenge in her gaze, but also something else, something I couldn't quite name. A promise, perhaps. Or a question. I looked down at my empty stew bowl, a knot forming in my stomach. The meal was almost over. This unexpected reprieve, this brief moment of connection, was drawing to a close. I didn't want it to end. I wanted to stay in this warm, safe space under her quiet, steady gaze, just a little longer. Thank you, Miller, I said, looking up again, my voice barely a whisper. For everything. She reached across the table, her calloused fingers briefly touching my hand, a light, almost accidental brush. The contact sent a jolt through me, a spark that ignited something deep inside. Her touch was fleeting, gone almost as soon as it began, but the sensation lingered, a warm echo on my skin. Her eyes, those unsettling blue eyes, held mine. And in that moment, I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me, that this was not just about a ride, or a mechanic, or a bowl of stew. This was about something else entirely. Something new, something dangerous, and something utterly, irrevocably beautiful. The world outside, with its broken trucks and endless struggles, faded away, leaving only the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights, the lingering scent of her grandmother's stew, and the electric memory of her